Thanks everyone for joining today. Really excited to talk about this topic. Jen and Spencer from our technical account management team are going to dive into how to enable GTM teams on data. I'm going to hand it off to Spencer to introduce himself.
Great. Thanks, Anna. So I'm the head of technical account management at Matic. We automate the creation and delivery of data-driven content. We're excited to talk to you today about how you can enable your go-to-market teams on data. So I'll pass it off to Jen to get things going.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Snyder. I am a senior technical account manager here at Matic. I'm also here to talk to you about how to enable your teams on data. Excited to be here today and speak to you on this topic. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Well, first off, I'm excited to talk to you about how to enable your go-to-market teams on data. Let's face it, data is everywhere. We're bombarded with a ton of information from customer behaviors to market trends and more. But the real power lies in how you can use that data to make smart decisions and get ahead of the game. So go-to-market teams are your rock stars when it comes to bringing products and services to the market. They're the ones responsible for generating revenue, expanding the market reach, and engaging customers. So we want to bridge that gap between the richness of the insights and the ability to deliver that richness without a loss in translation. And when they have the right tools and the know-how to work with data, they can do wonders. So listed in front of you are the topics that we're going to be discussing today. I'm confident by the end of the session, you will walk away with a clear understanding of how to enable your go-to-market teams on data, enabling them to leverage the power of information to drive growth, enhance customer experiences, and achieve business success. But before we dive into strategy and tactics for data enablement, you should start by asking yourself the following question. Who are the people on your go-to-market team? And when we say who, we don't mean names or teams like customer success, your TAM team, sales, and marketing, but who they are. Who are these people? Their strengths and their weaknesses. Ultimately, these people have a different skill set from the ones on this call today, where many of you may live and breathe data. These individuals may not be so data savvy. So let's face it, you've built the machine, it's obvious to you how to use it, but not necessarily obvious to the users. And by starting with that understanding will help you be more empathetic and ultimately be more effective in training them. So at some point, we've all been asked, if not one, many of these questions on this slide. So I would like to say my favorite question, because I've asked them previously so often, is where's my data coming from? How do I describe this metric, or what chart should I use for this data? These questions are a sign that the data enablement process is not working. And frankly, you probably don't have time to be bombarded with all of these questions. But these questions are a symptom of an underlying problem. Your non-data savvy team members just don't feel confident about the data, whether it's pulling the metrics, creating visualizations, or just speaking to it. Go-to-market teams have a unique challenge. They're not the ones completing the analysis and as a result miss out on the foundational context. But with good data enablement process, these questions turn into the you're going to start seeing less questions and more feedback that you can actually use. You'll even start to see some excitement. Data enablement is not about turning these go-to-market team members into data analysts. Again, their skill set is different from yours for a reason. You want to help empower them to be themselves by removing any lack of confidence that comes from having to present data. The goal is to help them be eager, positive, and fearless. So how do we do that? these milestones are a great time to do a chunk of data enablement. A lot of the things that you implement at each of these points will be evergreen. So it's not like a training session you do at launch and you're done, but it includes the resources you create at launch that can be used on an ongoing basis. So the biggest mistake we see in data enablement programs is that it only starts when the content is ready at launch. Effective data enablement starts the moment you decide to create a new piece of content. Launch is fairly straightforward and what we're familiar with. Iteration refers to whenever you make a change to an existing piece of content. While that change may be small to you or quick to make, it might have a different feel for someone who isn't familiar with the data as you are. So for each of these milestones, we'll go through the things that you need to keep in mind, and at the end, we'll cover some of our favorite tactics to use for data enablement. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with Spencer to continue.
Great. Thank you, Jen. All right. Yeah, let's talk about the creation stage. This is really where the data enablement journey begins, because it's really about what you plan on delivering to your go-to-market teams so that they can speak to this data and these insights effectively. So let's talk about the 4 components of this. The first component of really setting up the creation stage well is understanding who you're building this content for. Whether it's a dashboard or a presentation, it's really important to know the audience and how those insights need to be created so that that audience will receive it most effectively. The second part of the creation stage is doing research sessions. You may have an idea of what you already want to build, but if you don't know the actual feedback from who has been on these front lines and how certain customers have been receiving your go-to-market messaging and your insights already, then you're not going to be able to effectively create the actual assets that you want to be most well received. The third part of the creation stage is making sure that the data that you're actually putting into these reports really have a high standard of integrity. We've all been in that situation where we're getting maybe our signals crossed or certain data is not matching up. Data integrity is really important. So testing it, making sure that it matches up with everything else that is being reported to your customers is really critical at this, and making sure that the pipeline is solid as well, that you're not only having the data integrity standards that you need today met, but you've got a good pipeline and process for it to be met into the future. The last stage of creation to really think about is when you're building these assets, think about how long it will take for someone unfamiliar with it to understand what you're trying to say. So this is kind of the 20 seconds or less concept. If you just gave this chart, this visual, the slide in front of someone that's not very familiar with it, are they able to take away the key insights, the key takeaways that you want them to in 20 seconds or less without someone having to articulate it immediately? Let's talk about the second stage, which is launch. So again, this is really critical stage because this is where you're actually starting to introduce these concepts, these data insights to your go-to-market fields. One of the most important parts of launch is making sure that you have champions of the content in the field. These are going to be the people that will speak to that content best and be great resources for other people in the organization on how it can best be used. You can then use these people to really make sure that people are actually adopting these insights, these presentations that you're creating in an effective way. The second part of launch is making sure that you're doing testing every step of the way. And that could just be field testing with a few pieces of a presentation or a dashboard, something like that. It's really about making sure that you have some actual pieces of evidence to point to that these insights are effective. This data is communicating the message that is on brand, that is actually something that is showing value to my audience. The last part of launch is making sure that you have feedback loops set up. So do you have SLAs on when people would like to see changes in your content? Do you have a mechanism for people to give feedback on what's working, what's not working? Maybe that feedback loop is having those champions but really become those subject matter experts and meeting with them on a regular basis, particularly in the beginning of a launch. So let's dive in a little bit more about feedback here. So what's the best way to get feedback? Select those few reps that you know are always going to be giving you feedback regardless, because those are usually the best ones to build those relationships with, and make sure that they're testing it in the field. Sit in on calls. I mean, that's something that, analysts probably don't do often enough in organizations. You can put together a beautiful presentation with all sorts of really sophisticated insights, but if it's not being delivered well, then a lot of that's going to be lost. So actually sit in on a call, see what's working, see what's not. Maybe you need to add a little more context or do some tweaks just by sitting in on those calls. Again, in tandem with that, watch recordings. A lot of organizations have the miracle of Gong these days. So that's where it's really helpful. You can find keywords in a lot of these recording tools and figure out, you can jump around to how people are speaking to certain parts of a presentation. All of that is really helpful. The second to last one here, survey is pretty straightforward, but I don't underestimate the power of a survey, especially an anonymized one. People will be honest in those, and it can be really helpful in getting kind of the macro picture of how this is being received. Slack, we all use Slack, so we just wanted to call that out here. Not just Slack, we know there are plenty of other tools, some of like Teams or even Google Chat that people use, but making sure messaging channels can be helpful, particularly because when there's a large group of people within that messaging channel, so that whole go-to-market team is on that, they're feeding off of each other. They're seeing feedback that other people are submitting, and they're getting answers based on that feedback or questions from that feedback as well. And so it's a good way to just build up an ecosystem of feedback with Slack channels or whatever chat system you have internally. All right, let's talk about the final stage, was iteration. Again, so important that we don't forget about this when enabling go-to-market teams. So make sure that in that iteration stage that when you are iterating, you're making improvements. You're not just making those niche improvements based on the loudest voices. You're optimizing for everyone. And so what that means is, there could be a small contingent that wants you to go further with insights or have richer level of detail. That might not be for everyone. Think about who is going to get the most amount of benefit from it, making sure you're incorporating everyone in the iteration process. Making sure that you're providing context when you are making changes. One of the biggest mistakes you could make is release something, have a great launch, and then all of a sudden you get some immediate feedback and you immediately make a change. That's going to make it seem a bit confusing on what the original intent was. So adding context to why these changes are made and making sure that you're not iterating so rapidly in the beginning that you're starting to dilute the main message of the content you're delivering. Communicating the why here is also really critical. So why are we making these changes, and why is it important that we should be making these changes? Again, part of this is thinking about the cadence. So let's dive a little bit more into the iteration stage. So when should I iterate? Again, make sure that it's not being optimized for a specific niche audience. You're looking at broader feedback, but you will know a lot of times when it is significant. And a lot of that could be based on outcomes. Perhaps some people have tweaked some content and it's gone over really effectively because you sat in on a call or you looked at some feedback in a recording. That's a pretty clear signal that maybe it's time to react to some of the feedback that you're getting. Change in messaging, products are changing constantly in an organization. Your branding may be changing, your go-to-market messaging and holistically might be changing. As a result, you need to make sure that your content's being up to date and it's matching that, and your data insights are also up to date. The last one around here is cadence based. So we do recommend, at least having a quarterly cadence where you are making updates. This is an opportunity to think about not all the significant things, but all the small things that are bubbling underneath the surface. Maybe it's a tweak in wording. Maybe it's a chart visual that needs to be just slightly updated. You should be making those changes, but don't feel like you need to make all of those small changes constantly. Those are the sort of the under the fold, below the fold changes that you could just build upon on a regular cadence-based iteration. Great, and I'll pass it back off to Jen here.
All right, so as we segue to best tactics, here are some that I feel like will help you in enabling your teams. So first, let's go ahead and start with training. When it comes to training, set up those one-on-one sessions. They are so powerful. So for example, a session can be how are the key metrics are pulled, or how to talk through the content, or even a practice session. This is not only going to give your teams the tools to talk on that data, present that data, but make them more confident as well. Also, to set up your teams for success, provide some resources. Create a video walkthrough. I myself am a very visual person. I can read as much as I can until I'm blue in the face, but to see it is just so powerful. And it sticks with me. So videos are always, always helpful. Also, a glossary or acronyms. Glossary for acronyms are helpful as well. Each organization has their own way of speaking, how they refer to things. And especially as your team grows and as you scale, having that glossary is going to help them. And if there's any common questions or concerns regarding a piece of data, it's also helpful to have an internal wiki page, right? That'll have a talk track, a story notes, and key answers to some popular questions. This will be a really good, handy resource for your go-to-market teams. So they're not always bombarding you with all of the things. And last, but certainly not least, it does not stop there. We got to keep things ongoing, right? So share recording, sharing is caring, right? And also biweekly office hours, that can be helpful too. We go through the grind of day-to-day operations, questions come up, and sometimes we get busy and we don't communicate as effectively. So by implementing those biweekly office hours is going to be really helpful for your go-to-market teams. And make it fun too, right? We always see meetings on our calendars and it's like, oh, great, another meeting. But if you make it fun and knowledgeable for your teams, I find that you get a better response and more interaction. So a good example is, let's say, a Tech Tuesday. So for every other Tuesday, you get together, you talk about all the things regarding data, or an Ike Wednesday, I know everything Wednesday. So if you make it fun and enticing for your teams, and the more collaboration you have, the more successful they will be. So that is all of our tactics. I'm going to go ahead and open the floor for questions. Does anybody have any questions regarding anything?
Jen, one question we saw come through: when it comes to feedback, what is a sign that something is working?
That's a really great question. One of the biggest things that I've experienced in terms of feedback is the positivity, right? My customer really loved this metric. They weren't tracking this before, and they had no idea that this was going on within their organization. That's a good sign that feedback is working. And it's okay if it's not working too, like on the flip side of that. And they'll tell you if it's not working. They'll say, this is great, but I want to communicate my customer on this. Not quite sure how to do that. Is there any data or metric that I can communicate my customer with regarding that? So that is a good idea. That feedback is working. Spencer, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's really good. I mean, there's nothing better than the delight factor, I like to call it, where are people leaving a conversation sort of wowed and delighted by the recommendations and insights you shared with them. On a more data approach, look at the content that's currently being used, how it's being used, and what are the outcomes from that? Or are you seeing more touch points with customers? Are you seeing better response rates from customers? Things like that. There's some tangible ways to know when things are working.
Another question. I'm on a smaller team with fewer resources. What are the top 2 to 3 tactics I should definitely implement out of all the ones you showed?
That's a really good question. I have to say I have a lot of tools, but I'll start with the wiki page, the internal wiki page, right? So if you have a smaller team, if you can collaborate with your team on an internal wiki page that they can refer to, and then make sure you update it often, right? Because things change, especially as you grow. So as your team grows, they have something to refer to. Also videos as well, I find to be really, really helpful in terms of resources. Spencer, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say the three that I couldn't live without are one, a session, a video recorded session on how to actually speak to the content is very important. The second is strong story notes. How are people actually speaking to it, or how should they be speaking to it? And the third is some sort of office hour cadence. I really think it's important to avail yourself to go to market as an analytics or operations team. Avail yourself to the people that you're creating content for, and make it feel like they have an open connection to you to provide feedback.
Another question. What's the sweet spot for number of times you can iterate in a year?
Spencer, I'm going to leave that one to you.
Yeah, I can
Fire
take
mine's
that
one
one. Yeah. Most teams are on some sort of a quarterly prioritization. And most ops teams or analytics teams or insights teams go through a prioritization exercise of the level of impact and the level of effort, right? So that's when that is typically the sweet spot, because that's when all the big great changes and iterations will happen. But if there's anything, there's feedback to improve, but then there's quality of life improvements that really should be happening on a pretty regular basis. You should feel like the assets you have or your go-to-market team should feel the assets they have are not being neglected. So don't forget about the quality of life changes, but for like the bigger changes, the bigger iterations that will, tangibly or materially change the construction of a narrative, quarterly is probably the ideal sweet spot.
This next question is a really interesting question. This person recently joined, or let me say from their perspective, I recently joined this company and it seems like they have a lot of, they went through a lot of turnover with their documents and their collateral. How do I overcome that negative emotion towards data and data-driven content?
That's a really good question. Yeah, it's a really good one. I would say my advice to you is, out of the slew of collateral that you have, find the top 3 or top 2 that are most useful to you. I know it sucks to go through an audit of things, but it has to happen at some point, especially if you want to clean up the things and do a rinse and repeat. So one, do an audit, find the top 2 that are most helpful for you, and really gravitate to the tools that set you up for success. For me, starting at a new organization, there's a lot of learning there, right? You're going through a lot of training manuals, a lot of internal wiki pages. It's how much content or information can I digest without going crazy? So for me, I've always told myself, what is one positive thing that I've done today? Whether it's learning a new function within the UI or being able to help a counterpart with a piece of data that I understood and they didn't know and they learned something new. Or how can I clean up this collateral so that everybody will find it helpful and useful? I always think from the other side, what would they need for it to be helpful? So I know that's a lot at once, but do an audit, stick to the things that work for you, and walk away with one win. It may just be one, but it's still a win.
Yeah, I completely agree with those three. I've been in an organization where data trust has deteriorated over time, and we had to build that back up. And to Jen's point, how you do that is not by tackling everything at once, and you don't do it overnight. You pick one thing to do really well, you focus on that, you build that data trust back in, and the narrative trust and the collateral trust back up incrementally over time.
Thank you both. I think that's it for the questions that we have from our audience today.
Right. Well, thank you all. Appreciate everyone for joining.
Thank you so much. I hope you find this helpful and look forward to hearing any feedback from today's session and how you've enabled your go-to-market teams with data. So thank you.